Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as long as you get the message across, I think that's all that matters. I feel like audio is more important than the video anyways.
Yeah, YouTube life is interesting. I'm just now getting into it. So, Joe, we are recording. I'd just like to ask you just a few simple questions. Mainly, I'd like to know, like, what got you into like paranormal things or like psychic abilities, because it seemed like that's like something you're really interested in based off of like your meditation videos I've seen on YouTube, and you're like really into Krishnamurti, it seems like.
Yeah, so the psychic power stuff, I think that started probably in my teens. It was a very, very long time ago. And believe it or not, what actually led to it was kind of a rabbit hole. This is probably 15 years ago, long before a lot of the conspiracy genre stuff really blew up. Like I remember listening to Alex Jones back in the early 2000s with my dad. He was more of a fan of him than I was myself. But, I kind of got out of the conspiracy stuff because I said to myself, if there are, say, for example, let's assume for the sake of the argument, there are world powers, so to speak, that control the world. And of course, I think we know that there are. And they have money, they have influence, they have their world structures, they have their psychological influences on people. But I always wondered, what's the basis of that? Like, there's always a foundation that allows one to be, say, more intellectually endowed than another person. And so, without going into too much detail in that, I kind of came to this conclusion that when you really start reading about like ancient Rome and the ancient churches and really the foundations of like what is considered now the Kundalinis and the Yoga Sutras, the Upanishads, the Rig Vedas, then I came to this almost intuitive insight where I said to myself, my God, there is this social structure that we understand today as, the Western world, or if you read enough history books, you kind of see that there's always been this certain type of social structure where, people follow this certain type of paradigm and, people chase money and all this stuff. But behind it, there is a type of real power where I think even the Bible itself alludes to. We don't have to necessarily go into the depths of like the Yoga Sutras and the Rig Vedas, where they clearly talk about these types of things under the guise of siddhas or psychic powers, as they're called. Mm-hmm. Even in the Bible, we have Jesus walking on water, resurrecting the dead, curing the incurable. Yeah. Transforming objects, bread, water into wine. And all of these, ironically, are not too dissimilar from what we find in the Kundalini Upanishads under the major and the minor siddhas, which again are just psychic powers. And so I had made this casual revelation, if you will, probably about 15 years ago. And so with all of, so I'm going to be, how old am I now? 37.
Oh, okay. And so then you're about what, late teen, like you said, you're a teenager about?
Well, that's when I got interested in it. I would say this is probably, I'm in my early 20s at this point, okay. Probably 23, 24 is when I really started getting heavy into like the breath work. Like, a lot of people are into breath work now because of Wim Hof. Yeah. I knew about that stuff because of Swami Shivananda through the Kundalini Upanishads. He did a commentary on it. I actually suggest you guys and you yourself, you can download it for free. It's called the Kundalini Upanishads by Swami Shivananda. You can download the PDF. And that's the one where I got introduced to what's called Bhastrika Pranayama. It's a very, very powerful siddha type of breath work, which, Wim Hof came, he popularized the technique. It's somewhat, it's known as the Wim Hof technique, but 10 years before that, I was already doing that. I mean, it's good and bad. It's a double-edged sword.
Well, it's funny to me because it's been around for forever. Breathing has been around since life. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. And somebody comes around and proprietizes it, and to me, I see it as a double-edged sword because it's like, hey, he's getting the message out there and helping people. That's cool. But to call it a Wim Hof technique, it's like, come on, dude. Like, yeah, no, no.
He's the Dutchman. He's Iceman. Like,
but hell, he's helping people and he's promoting a good thing. So you got to give him that, and it is
absolutely
what it is. So yeah, I was, and ever since that time, that casual revelation that I had, where I was basically convinced that it is psychic powers that give the authority or power for people to do the things that they do. Now, whether they just want to be monks and not deal with the world, or if they want to influence the world and help the world evolve in a certain way, then you can do that. But that fundamental power, that charisma, that magnetism that you have that can actually get people to do things for better or worse is fundamentally rooted in something a little bit more subtle than just the pure intellect or psychology. And I think that's psychic powers. And I'm pretty, and, you know, from all my research, we don't have enough time, even if we had hours and hours to go into the details. But even through my own experiences throughout the years, when I would really, really raise a lot of my, cleanse a lot of my prana, do a lot of my breath work, when I would go into seclusion for a while and do meditations and come out of it, I can attest to this, and people who know me can attest to this, that you definitely get a type of magnetism and a charisma where, for lack of a better term, you know, you can influence people to a great extent without them knowing, because your magnetism is so strong. And a lot of this has to do with that inner spiritual work. And we all have it within us. You know, it's just a matter of doing proper technique and then putting in the work. That's it. You know, the potential's there for everybody. And so, yeah, you know, back to, you know, that time when I had come to that casual revelation, I had really started doing the breath work a lot, you know, a lot of meditation. I, you know, read a tremendous amount of scriptures. Again, you know, I've read the Bhastrika, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishads. I read a lot of the major Upanishads, the Rig Veda, of course, the Bhagavad Gita. I've read, you know, tremendous amounts of commentary on the Yoga Sutras, and of course, commentaries on the Bible, the Kabbalah and all that. And I came to this kind of synthesis where I was just like, yeah, you know, they're all saying the same thing. Everybody just has different experiences, and their culture puts different appellations and names. But the phenomenon that everybody's experiencing and the end goal really is the same thing. And so it's just, you know, that's kind of a very brief background of how I got into the psychic stuff and the really the spiritual practice. The psychic stuff is the byproduct of the spiritual practice. But, you know, that's kind of how I got into it, and really why I maintain it. I mean, it is the life force. You know, without that kind of health inside your body, you know, you have nothing. And to me, it is the alpha omega of your physical and mental and emotional and obviously spiritual well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it interesting that you've kind of taken the, you know, there's kind of I feel like a general theme where people get to waking up and they get into the Alex Jones and the conspiracy. Right. And then, well, more or less people kind of have an idea about the psychic components of reality, but like once people, like, you start thinking outside of the box and you go down a different route. But whether you're aware of like psychic abilities before you're into Alex Jones or not, it's just kind of interesting, because I've kind of taken a similar route. I remember while I was like worried about China of taking over America when I was younger, and then somebody was like, no, you need to worry about your own country. And then I got into he was like, dude kind of nudged me in the InfoWars direction, and that's kind of where I got into the whole giant conspiracy rabbit hole. And it's been a kind of a struggle for me to grasp that what's actually happening in the world right now, because the prana breath work is that so intrinsically tied into our well-being psychically and with our heart and everything. But we're told we have to cover and restrict our life force / prana in public now. So I'm obviously outspoken on that regard, and it's kind of one of the main reasons I've decided to be starting a podcast, to get, you know, everyone's different angle. But I have a quick question. So on that spectrum of like monkishness / Caesar like ability, let's just say, like, you know, what end of that spectrum are you feel like leaning towards on your psychic abilities? Are you Mr. I want to cultivate psychic abilities to have like the maximum amount of change and influence in the world, or am I cultivating my psychic abilities for my own well-being and my own inner peace?
Definitely the latter. Definitely the latter. You know, so, you know, when you cultivate psychic powers, it's through an exercise of sadhana, right? Or some kind of spiritual practice, be that breath work, meditation, scriptural reading, mantras, whatever it may be. And so, like, if you exercise, you can put on muscle and you can bulk. And if you stop exercising, you'll lose that muscle, right? Mm-hmm. So the spiritual practice is no different. When I go off on like hermitages and say I don't talk to somebody for a month or 2 or 3, and I just do mostly meditations, then a lot of that energy comes back. And, the quote unquote psychic powers will cultivate much more sternly and more pronounced than if I don't. So basically, like, in other words, the psychic powers, so to speak, they ebb and flow based on what's going on in your life. If you're really busy with mundane, worldly stuff, you're worried about money, you're worried about, just worldly stuff, you kind of lose it to a small extent. Not all the way, but to a small extent. And so I got into this place where, because we have to deal with the world as such, as long as we're going to be physical beings to some extent. And I like to produce these psychic powers within myself for the reason of as a type of proof in the scriptures and in God himself. Mm-hmm. And because to me, it was kind of like, how do we know that everything just isn't complete bullshit? Like, we know that our world paradigm to this day, and money's probably the best example. How much trust and faith did we have in money? And now we see it collapsing in front of us. And that's a good thing. It's going to be very stressful for a lot of people, but it's a good thing. But, I guess because I've read so many history books and I've seen the cycles play out, and what's going on in the world today is no different than what was going on in ancient Rome or Europe or France, or it's always the same thing, And I didn't want to put my heart and faith into something that was fake. And that's where I kind of wanted to fact check and verify religious scriptures. Is this bullshit too? Like, when they talk about healing people, is it bullshit? Is God bullshit? Are we just dumb animals and we live and we procreate and then we just die? And because, I think it's normal to have those type of atheistic questions if you've never had a profound spiritual experience. Now, after you've had such an experience, or even more so, once you've cultivated psychic powers, as certain scriptures say you have, then to me, that's kind of a proof positive. Okay, these monks were telling the truth. When you do these types of things, you'll have these types of experiences. Listen, you don't have to believe me. I've gotten to a point, I'm not there now, where I could hear people's thoughts clearly as if you were talking to me. I've been there before. People who know me have verified this.
Interesting experience. I'm familiar with that.
And it was scary. And then years ago, I had asked God, I don't want this anymore, from the heart. You always got to come from the heart, earnesty, have a clear mind, and from the heart say you want something or don't want something. I asked it to stop and it stopped. It never came after that. But for about 2 years, I could hear what people were thinking. So I would answer their questions as they were thinking about stuff, but I would answer it aloud because in my head, I can hear it audibly. And it was right all the time. It wasn't like, what'd you say? It's like, you would be thinking, I don't know, let's go out and eat or something. And I would say, okay, give me 10 minutes. And that would be my response to you, but you didn't say anything, but it was accurate. And, and many other psychic powers like premonitions, being able to predict future events, whether they're accurate or not accurate, that has to do with the fourth dimension and intuition. Yeah. What else? Like being able to influence people's thoughts, making them think that they're thinking things that are their own original thoughts when it's not. Like that, I've actually personally have produced as well on both sides. I've witnessed that. And so I never went down the deep end, meaning like, I believe that there are certain people who can levitate. I've never seen it, but I do believe it's true. Jesus walked on water. That psychic power is through the perfection of the second chakra, the Svadhisthana. When you perfect the water element, so to speak, which is the second chakra, then, the Kundalini Yoga Sutras, they say that siddha will produce being able to walk on water and control the water element. So I believe all that's true. I've never seen it. But to answer your question, I'm sorry, I tangented really far off. To answer your question, I do it more for my personal, because I was blessed and fortunate enough at a very early age to realize that this life is so transient. And without the spiritual context, it's even meaningless. That's my opinion on the human life, because like, what do? You're born, you make some money, you have sex, you party, you pay bills, you buy a car. Like, what's after that? Okay, cool. We did all that. Like, if that's all that this human experience has to offer, it is truly a meaningless, mundane nothing, in my opinion. And so when you put it in the spiritual context, now things start having meaning and sense, because you can see the interrelatedness between, or rather the spiritual dimension between your quote unquote mundane actions. And so that's kind of where I'm at in my life right now, is that I want to be the best example that I can be, because of, not only for my own growth, but because I understand how interrelated things are. I've had that vision twice in my life where I had seen how everything was interrelated, and it's a difficult thing to explain because it's something to do with, like, if you had no blockers on your eyes, say that right now I told you to say, look behind you 100 feet and check out what's behind that plant. And you had that omnipotent vision on everything. And there was no barriers. You can and you can't.
That's all I can do is imagine what my experience of what is behind me. And that's, kind of that's just a first step into like the psychic.
Right. And now, so take that and then do it with everything around you in all time phrases. And that's basically a type of like omnipotent vision, if you will. I've had that twice in my life.
Omnipresence.
And I described that kind of, and the feeling that was accompanied by that vision was just an extraordinarily kind, compassionate, loving feeling. I don't know how to describe it. Like, I saw ants, I saw plants, I saw how water was alive, I saw how the dirt was alive. Everything was alive, and it had its own vibration. It had its own ego. I've seen that twice before, and it was in a matter of seconds. It was quick like that. Everything kind of froze. Everything became really not overwhelming, but like I heard everything differently, and it was beautiful. Like, it was absolutely, it's a type of experience that will change the way you look at things, And, to answer your question, I never had this kind of like, they call it the hero complex in the Yoga Sutras, and I fortunately never had that. I don't have that. I realized that the world is the way it's supposed to be. We can't forsake the fact that, as shitty as certain parts of the world and the environment and human beings may be at this current time everything has a cause and effect, right? Like, we couldn't have gotten here if people didn't consent to it. And the thing is now people are starting to wake up, but there's a consequence to that, and it's a cause and effect. And I because of some of the experiences and the visions I've had and enough history books that I've, read, and I'm just convinced of it, I feel that everybody is kind of where they're supposed to be in life. And that's both the individual and the society. And, to try to come and usurp that cycle, that evolution is to an extent kind of blasphemous, but more than blasphemous, I think it's a pursuit in vain, because it's like you're trying to override what the universal intelligence has deemed just. I mean, how arrogant, how stupid is that, to think that we as individuals know better than the intelligence of the universe? It's complete idiocy. It's complete stupidity. And again, when you read enough history books, and you do have a certain spiritual level of understanding, you see that like everything is exactly the way it should be. It's all good. If you come at situations, you just see that everything is a series of cause and effects. That's it. Like, if you put out good energy, you're going to get good back. If you put out, malicious intention, malicious energy, you're going to get it back in some way, shape, or form. If you put out shitty energy and you fuck people over, you're going to get that back in some way, shape, or form. I've seen it. I've been part of it. I've seen it on both sides of the spectrum. And so, to answer your question, I do it more for myself, because I see that just like you, just like everybody else, we're all parts of this infinite matrix that kind of plays off of itself.
Not everyone it lives in that world, Joe. I mean, I'd love to think that and believe that, but I don't think everyone, I think everyone has the capacity to understand that and see that in a way, but I'm not sure if that's all of our fundamental operating system. But
no.
That's what we're trying to uncover, though, is to reveal that is like, my cause affects you, and your cause affects me. So, but yeah, the realm of causality is pretty interesting.
Right. Most people are not on that frequency. I've been kind of in and out of, the conscious community. I've been part of the spiritual community. I've been, I've known a lot of people deep in the conspiracy communities. I myself am not part of any of them. I've been part of them. I know people that are deep in those things. And, you're right that most people aren't of that vibration, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you try to be the best that you can, and you try to vibrate the highest you can, because even if, the world goes to shit and you kind of increase your vibration and you, so to speak, reach that state of liberation, you've helped kind of the whole human race unbeknownst to them directly, so.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, if you're good with yourself, and again, I can personally vouch for this. This is not theory. This is my personal experience. When there's times when I'm really good with myself, meaning spiritually, like I'm feeling good, crystal clear vision, my emotions are on point, like everything's just balanced and good. You do have a certain shine and a charisma to you that will naturally influence people to do good, and they won't even know it. They won't understand why. They'll be calm around you. They'll be clear headed. They'll want to do better than worse. I mean, you've been around it. We've all been around it. When you're around crazy people, you act crazy. You know, when you're around angry people, you get angry, right? When you're around scared people, you get scared. It's just like people are going to vibe off of what you're putting off of. So you don't got to worry about people. You got to just worry about you and be the best example you can be, because trust me, I can 100% vouch for this. If you're good, if your like light is shining and you're clear on your thoughts and you're feeling good and you're feeling connected to the source, genuinely, people will want to emulate that. And you don't have to preach it. You don't have to talk about stuff. You don't have to go there. Did you hear this? No, people will want to be like that, you know? Yeah. So that's why it always goes back to you. You know, the world is what the world is. It's been here infinite or a long time. It's going to be here a long time after the human race has probably killed itself or served its purpose. Don't worry about the world. It's going to be here. You know, worry about what you can do to get to better states of consciousness for yourself. And if you're truly there, people will want to emulate it. You don't have to talk. You know, the charisma will change people just, you know, tacitly through your demeanor, through your light. I've seen it. I've been that light before. Not all the time, but I've been that light before. So I know it's true, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's some pretty good insight there. And I feel like it's something that, I mean, I don't want to get too personal, but it's funny. A lot of my stuff has been really personal that I put online, and I'm an interesting fella, like we all are. But it just sounds like some stuff I need to hear right now is you know, taking care of myself and working on my own vibration. And I do worry about, like, especially the Western world, and especially America right now, because we're in this cocoon metamorphic state right now. And you know, all of us collectively, and I think some of us are going through individual metamorphosis, transformations, but whatever is going to come out of what is what is supposed to be. And it's kind of pretty interesting. You got
right
to like the Taoist, like, and even Confucian, you know, governing thyself is governing society, like, and that's
right.
The strangest. I've always known and believed that is like, what point is government? It's just a image, a symbol, really, and people think that we pay for protection, and that there's some kind of like
right.
firm ground to stand on, and a safe place. You know,
no, I always told that to people, and it's funny because now 20 years later, I think a lot of the, you know, and you know, I'm not so much for anarchy, but a lot of this business where people are starting to realize that the government is really against the people, you know, with the whole George Floyd thing. I don't want to go down that hole, but I always used to say that, you know, when the police say to protect and serve, it's like, but who? Because it's not the people, right? It's the system.
We did never consent to this form of rule or what have you.
You didn't. And so, you know, I was saying that 20 years ago. Like, I remember, you know, I don't want to tangent too far off the spiritual stuff, but it's
wherever you want, brother.
It's, you know, I remember when I was 14 years old, my mom says, you know, we had this small little property, a couple acres out in the Inland Empire. And, you know, she had it paid in full, and she said she had to pay taxes on it. And I was 14 years old. I said, why? You know, you said you own it. And she's like, oh, if we don't pay for it, well, you seize it. And I said, so you don't own it? I was 14 years old, mind you. This is like the 90s at this point. And she's like, no, we own it, but we still have to pay property taxes every year. And I'm like, just don't. And she's just like, they're going to take it. And I'm like, so you don't own it? And she started getting irate with me because she's like, no, they're going to take it and I'm thinking I'm stupid here, because I'm like, I think I understand what the idea of owner. And so now it's like a big thing with the sovereign movements. And I'm like, listen, guys, if you have to pay property taxes, if you have to pay car registration, you don't own those properties, because if somebody has the ability to seize it upon not payment, that means you're a renter, you're a leaser. It doesn't matter whether you have a title to something. You don't own it, right? If I sell you a pencil and I say, you know what, Jared, you're going to have to give me 5 cents every month for that pencil, because if you don't, I'm going to take it back. You're a renter. You don't own anything. right? And I had that already figured out when I was 14 years old. And now with the whole sovereignty thing, it's just like, oh yeah, no, yeah, you don't actually own anything, because citizens aren't allowed to own property, from my understanding. Through the whole allodial title, they used to be able to, but to my understanding, I've met a lot of these sovereign people. They spit a good game, but when it comes to crunch time, like the old medieval adage says, might makes right. If 20 sheriffs come in there with AK-47s, that's who owns that property. That's the bottom line. That as it is to say, but it is what it is. So because of just bullshit like this, and understanding how fraudulent the system is, how fiat the system is, how contradictory the system truly is to general favorability of the average person, I just kind of veer towards the spiritual, because I think, I've been through the legal system a lot. I know what it is in practice, not what it is in theory. And I know what people are in practice versus theory, right? We have theories about life, and then we have practice. And practically speaking, the world is what it is. Albert Pike said, and I have a tendency to kind of align with this philosophy. Pike. I could be wrong. Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma. I read him when I was 21, 22, way back when, now it's kind of a popular book. But
you used to read when reading was cool, and something that was more just reading these days. It's I don't know, man. I do. Pardon me. That's a whole tangent right there. But I'm glad to hear that you've done some reading, especially Mr. Pike.
No, I'm old school, man. I watch YouTube videos now, but up until even 2-3 years ago, I still, even to this day, I'm always reading scripture. This is a really good book. I recommend you get if you ever want excellent commentary on the Bible. It's called the Philadelphia. It's a 4-part series of these things. Just amazing literature. But I'm still a reader. I love reading. But just to finish up that thought, with the whole conspiracy and society thing, it's just I'm not angry at anybody, and I'm not going to try to change it, because I realize that it's a vibration. If you're good with yourself, you won't vibrate to that kind of negative energy, and people leave you alone. But if you go try to fight the system, I promise you the system will win every single time, because they got manpower versus you don't have, and you will never have. So don't try to change it. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to expose it. Millions of people have tried to expose it, and nobody listens until their people go down. Somebody gets shot by a police officer, somebody gets their assets or property taken away. Then they're like, oh my God, the government, did you believe that?
It doesn't even work. People still don't learn their lessons, but
they still don't. Right. And again, read a history book and see what the word sheriff comes from. They're tax collectors. That's what that word literally means.
I did not know that. And I'm big into etymology. It's something, especially since now that I have Google access, because I've gone through long periods of not having the interweb to supplement or detriment my my intellect, whichever, because
it's a tool. How you use it, it's just a tool,
Yeah, exactly.
You can watch porn all day and totally destroy your spirit, or you can use it for higher stuff like scriptures. It's just a tool. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. So I have another question, and I'm not looking at the time, so whenever you need to go, just yell at me. But so that sovereignty movement, there's not really much, as far as I understand, we can do as sovereign individuals. People think if you go and you do some hocus pocus word play in the courts, that you can wordplay yourself out of. Get out of here, screen. Sorry, the screen just blocked you. So some people are under the impression that you can talk your way out of the legal system through knowing sovereign citizenships, right? You're basically being endowed with this intellectual knowledge. But I know that there is something to that, and I would say it's more of just the mindset to being a sovereign. It's the mindset of knowing that, okay, we do actually only lease this physical vessel. This life force is just on lease. Our heart, our breath, our body, all that, it will expire. So we actually don't own our bodies or whatever either, via even a birth certificate, right? There's even that piece of paper. But I think if we get away from the whole notion of this is my body, this is my life, this is my will, and operate on a higher frequency and a higher dimension, that is what brings about freedom and sovereignty.
Well, sure. And that's, that's something I kind of touched up on a few minutes ago, is when you're good with yourself, spiritually speaking, and when you do your practice and your meditations and you resort to a higher power, a higher frequency, then a lot of this stuff with the iniquities of politics and government and money, they won't touch you, or you'll be protected by the spiritual, the other side. Again, that's my personal experience with it. When you said, indeed, this body and breath and everything is leased 100%. These are actually kind of intermediate to advanced level concepts in the spiritual world that, you don't own your own heart. You don't decide when your heart stops, right? You're not even in control of your own mind as much as you think there are. Actually, the stars are far more influential, and then society to a lesser extent. Like your own independent thoughts are, it's a scary idea, but when you kind of analyze it, your own independent thoughts are almost non-existent, and that's for everybody. Like you are an amalgamation of everything you've experienced in your environment, which is really just an amalgamation of everybody else's thoughts, kind of, and then you decided what you wanted to reject and what you wanted to accept as your own, but it's not your own. It's a powerful idea to really think about, and it's a good precursor to go into spiritual meditation, because it does kind of help you eradicate all of the thoughts that we polarize to think are ours, and we defend certain ideologies, but when you really analyze it, you understand it's not your ideology at all. And when we take that a step further, then you even realize that your body is borrowed material, your heart is borrowed, your prana is borrowed. All these things are borrowed. And I think, the designation that we have to make is the leaser. We are the leasees, and the leaser is God, right? And it's not a government or a human powers. I've heard people say, the Vatican owns your soul and your body. And to me, I'm like, well, I don't know if that's true. I don't agree with it if somebody has that written somewhere on a papal bull
made
somewhere.
A claim, perhaps. They've
right. I mean, but what does that mean? I can make a claim that you owe me $1 million. Who gives a shit? It doesn't
right
mean
here.
anything.
It's on the paper, bro. You owe me.
Right. I mean, I can write whatever I want to write. It doesn't mean anything. But going back to that idea, I've seen. So I'm not a sovereignty expert, but I've been around these so-called sovereign experts quite a bit in my life. And what I have experienced personally is, yes, they use a lot of big talk and mumbo jumbo and this and that. My personal takeaway from that is, if you don't have anything to take, the government will leave you alone. That doesn't mean you prevailed. That means they'll leave you alone. If you have assets to seize, a house, car, boats, jewelry, clothes, so on. If you have assets worth seizing, the government will not leave you alone. That's been my personal experience. So what happens a lot of times is you get this like bum that lives up in Canada, or Montana. And I don't mean bum. I don't mean to try to degrade anybody who's socioeconomically challenged, but I'm trying to imply that somebody who doesn't have
right now.
doesn't matter. That's all relative.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, like, if you don't have anything to take, they're not going to bother you. That doesn't mean that you prevailed or that your sovereignty theories or arguments had any relevance in a court of law. They're just going to say it's cheaper to leave this guy alone than keep him in prison for $80 a day. That's what they're basically saying. And they do that to a lot of people. Los Angeles is a hotspot for that now. People, they won't arrest you. If you steal something for less than $1,000 in Los Angeles, they won't even arrest you, because it's more expensive to call the cops, put you in jail, process you, have a court hearing than it is. They'll see you. If I see somebody, I'm a cop, I'm seeing somebody steal a $500 radio, they won't even come out, because it's more expensive to prosecute them than just to let them steal it. See that? Does that mean that they're legally allowed to steal it? Of course not. There comes a time when you have to balance whether it's even worth pursuing to enforce that law. And from my experience, what I've seen with all these sovereignty experts, they spit a good game. Listen, I was convinced for a short time too with the whole Odial Title 1861. I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then, the thing is you're going to go, if you have assets, you're going to go against so much firepower that even if for some reason you might have a chance, they'll find some kind of a legal loophole, or they'll bury you, or they'll keep you in the court system for so long that it won't be worth fighting. I know how the legal system works. I've been in plenty of lawsuits. I know how these assholes think. When you go against a DA, they get paid for this. You don't, right? So yeah. They don't care. They'll stay in it for 10 or 20 years because they're getting a fat check while you're just, you're wasting your energy, your resources, your finances, and maybe just on grounds of consistency, they're going to prevail, not even if they're legally right. So the takeaway is the sovereignty thing is good in theory, but I go back to what the medieval adage of might makes right. If you have enough gun power to defend yourself against somebody trying to steal something from you, you'll get away with it. If you don't, it doesn't matter. If you have something to take, the government will usually take it if they find a way to do it. You know, that's been my personal experience, what I've seen, you know, that's what I've witnessed personally. You're better off just learning the legal system and staying within the confines of the legal system. That's, you know, because there's ways you can protect yourself very well through asset protection and legal ways. But that's a whole different discussion, you know, but telling the government they don't have authority over you. Yeah. Good luck with that.
It works a little bit in some ways. Just, I think, like I said, if you have a belief system, and this is kind of like a tangent into something else, is just, and this is a great segue, actually. It's like, I've been listening to an attorney since last May. He's done over he's about 120 pieces of content, does about 2 a week. And he's been speaking out about the plain and obvious facts of how the system actually works. And he's actually, he's a huge inspiration, because it's like an enlightenment movement.
Okay.
And this ties back into might makes right, but then we go back to like, you know, paper covers rock, you know, the pen is mightier than the sword. These people operate off of belief systems, and it's I think that's ultimately like the most powerful things that are in operation, is what people have going on inside of their mind, because the mind is a tool that we use to shape reality. And I guess one of my biggest dreams, it was to travel the world and interview everyone from different cultures and belief systems, and ask them what they think the problem with society and humanity is. And I love how I basically already know your answer, which is probably going to be, well, there isn't, because this is the way it's supposed to be, you know, which is probably what any real guru or sage would say if you ask me. But then there comes these questions of like passivity and these new age belief systems that are instilled with like all these fanciful westernized notions of karma attached to them, like you know, these, you see just the tip buckets, it's like karma bucket or good karma jar or whatever. But it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting for me, because I get so worked up about what other people believe that I become identified with them as like a problem, and then all of a sudden I become the problem. So it's a huge head game for me with this whole entire, what this new belief system that's being manifested right now, with even looks like a whole damn ritual, you know, with like, look, I mean, I even have, you know, you do the whole ritual with like staying away and washing your hands and then wearing those, which none of that really will do anything beneficial. But it's, I don't know, man, what do you think about belief systems and yeah,
well, you know, you said that everything is a belief system, right? And that was kind of the big conflict between the Constitution, which is the United States belief system, and then, you know, Sharia law, because there's so many Muslims moving into certain states. And, you know, the Muslims wanted their Sharia law to prevail over the U.S. Constitution. And of course, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, the highest law of the land is the Constitution. But you're absolutely right. You know, everything starts off with a belief system, that it does, but it doesn't usually terminate there, because I think that belief system has to have a certain tipping point, or a certain maxima where enough people believe it for it to get a certain life and a force behind it. But before that happens, it's kind of like a seed. It doesn't really manifest. But, you know, it's kind of like what I was telling you with my revelations about how the government generally treats the people. I had those thoughts, you know, 20 years ago. And now we fast forward to a day where there's social media and people can communicate much better, and they show the injustices much more readily through what's actually going on. And this isn't all law enforcement, but there's a lot of law enforcement that is extraordinarily corrupt. They abuse people. They misuse their power. You know, they do very illegal things. And that's been going on for a very long time. But if you would have told somebody that 30, 40 years ago, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, you're an idiot. But it's like, no, I've seen that with my own eyes. But now, because you can see it, there's a whole energetic paradigm that's changing and a belief system that's changing, that we really have to reevaluate our relationship to our own government. Because, you know, it comes back to the fact that we pay taxes for them to serve us, which they're clearly not doing, and they haven't been doing for a long time, right? They serve and protect the system, not the people. And I think that's becoming more evident. So you're right, everything starts off as a belief system, but until you get a certain culmination of people that believe it, which is that force that makes change actually happen, then it's just a belief system, right? Because, you know, you're right, everything is a belief system. It's what I said about 10, 15 minutes ago. You know, when you really think and stop to think about what is your own original thought, minus any kind of divine revelation, if you've ever had like some kind of grace or revelation that comes straight from the source, we are all just amalgamations of other people's thoughts. That's all we all are. I'm no exception. You know, I've experienced the latter, so I can make that call and I could say indeed. But you said it yourself. You know, you get attached to somebody else's ideologies, and either you're in support of it or you're against it. But
that's ego. That's fucking all part of my language. Right. It's all ego, and right. Man. So what are
but see, this is part of the spiritual process. It's nothing to get upset about. It's good that you observe that, because most people never even observe that. Most people will waste their entire life fighting all these causes because it feels good to them or it feels bad to them, but they don't understand they're just really pawns in a cosmic scheme of things where they're not even in charge of their own sovereignty. You know, you talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty isn't using big words and convincing people.
It's a mindset, man. That's kind of why I was trying to tie it into a mindset.
But even before a mindset, it's a spiritual state of consciousness. That's what it is first and foremost. And that's kind of what I was saying in the very beginning of this. You know, when, you know, I was never a big conspiracy theorist. I knew a lot of them. You know, I know my own dad, he was big into Alex Jones in the very beginning. Like this is talking, you know, in the early 2000s.
Alex Jones just makes me want to yell just hearing that name.
Yeah. And listen, like he had a lot of truth to what he was saying. You know, sometimes he slipped up just like any human being, but either way, it's like, okay, let's say the conspiracy theories are true. Let's say that there's these, you know, families that rule the world, which I think there
lizard
are. But
people.
what's their...
Let's just go all the way to straight to David Icke and lizard people shapeshifting.
But the thing is, what's the basis of their power? And it goes back to the spiritual, you know, so we don't have to worry about, but before a belief system, right? Because a belief system is just that, it's an ideology. But there is such a thing as natural law, which is not a belief system. It's the way the universe is.
Fundamental. Yeah, it's like I love natural law because it goes, you know, all the way up to the supreme law. Sorry to interrupt, which is just unity. You know, that's the most supreme law there is all is one. So
and I feel that the individual should really focus on attuning themselves to that natural law. Because the ideology, they don't mean anything. I mean, look at 100 years ago, it was acceptable to, you know, disparage and mistreat Black people. Today, Black people are like gods. It's like, look how stupid society is. You know, you just on the drop of a hat, you can tell them anything and they'll believe anything, you know, whether it's masks, whether it's terrorism, you know, whether it's, you know, economy. And none of this stuff is different. You know, this is the way, you know, go make a house and a children and everybody runs towards it. Oh, no, you know, there's, you know, I remember in the 90s and the 80s, Black people were the worst thing in the world because they were all drug dealers, right? That's what the news used to tell us.
Yeah, and now some shit like that.
You know, like now you get this guy who was, you know, doing all these drugs and trying to pay with fake currency, and people are, you know, treating him like he was a martyr and an angel. It's just like, just behold how stupid people are, how easily persuadable and convincible they are. Like, don't worry, like the ideology, stay away from ideologies. You will find nothing of value there, whether this side or that side. They're all idiots. There's something deeper than that, and go there, like to the natural law. That's to me, that's kind of the secret. And when I do that, I never go wrong. I always feel whole. I always feel complete. You know, when everybody's worried about the world falling, I shrug my shoulders and say, dude, everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. You're going to die one day. We're all going to die one day. What are you worried about? Like, you don't own this body. And I think you've tricked yourself into thinking that your opinions mean something valuable or that your body means something. It isn't. You're just a drop in an infinite sea. Never forget that, you know?
I'm just trying to have some interesting conversations before I die. You know, like but see, that's literally... This is literally what I like. This is a healing experience. This is just what I honestly know that this is like one of my air quote callings or things to do. I'm an orator. I love speaking and I'm learning and like that's been one of my issues, is dealing with mundane, the monotony and all that, because I'm so far up in the clouds most of the time and have like so much lofty idealism, constantly going through my head, but not like manifesting it down into the 3D. And it's like, it's hard for me to connect and relate to people if they're not on this kind of,
Right.
mindset where it's like, oh, they do want to talk about the mundane, who's going to be the next president, which like, fuck, I was even wrong. I thought Trump had it by a landslide. I thought they were just going to have to keep him president to make all the, gun-toting nationalists, pacified. But shit, man, I was just obvious to it looked like, but then even I was wrong. But yeah, it's like getting fucking caught up even in just talking about that gives me a headache, man, right now. But
well, because your consciousness is polarizing towards it too much. That's why. Because
yeah,
you still believe that idea has value. You got to get away from it. It has
well,
no value.
even any value at all, like if even or no value, like like you said, even the it's just like the concept that even holds any water to me is now like hearing that reflected back to me. It's kind of funny because like, yeah, like there's nothing I can do to counter somebody's belief system. If they fully believe, then that's like me, you and I, where we believe more in natural law, and you go to the supreme law, which is unity. And to tell someone that's on the frequency of like, I'm a Republican and an American, like, hey bro, I'm actually you, I'm just a reflection of you, and the only difference between us is a perspective. Like, what? Like, but
Right. Well, it is, everybody's on their own spiritual journey, and you got to understand that everybody will come to that conclusion, whether in this life or later, just like you didn't necessarily understand it when you were 5 or 10 years old, or maybe in your past life, but then at some point you got it, and I feel that everybody will eventually come to that conclusion. But that's kind of neither here or there. It's more like, again, focus on you, because if you yourself are good internally and spiritually, like people will gravitate towards you, and you don't have to convince anybody. You don't have to, talk anybody down. You don't have to persuade them. That's not our place, I feel, as other human beings, unless you have some kind of deceitful intention, which sounds kind of crazy. But why convince anybody? Unless you want some kind of utilitarian benefit, just go live your life, and focus on your own spirit. And once you're at that vibration where you're vibrating good, trust me, that charisma and that magnetism is real. And people go, hey, what's your secret? And then you can, if you want to, you can share and proselytize. But arguing with people, why? Arguing with people, the result of that, if you want to convince them, is with guns. That's why might makes right. And that's what the government does, right? The government doesn't say, hey, Jared, you did something wrong, forsake your property or forsake your time. They come in there with pistols to your head and they say, this is what's going to be. And it works every time, right? And it's unfortunate, but that's how barbaric the human race still is in the current time. And perhaps it always will be. Again, I've read enough history books to know that this was no different today than it was in ancient Rome, that it was in ancient Babylon. Human beings have generally been barbarians and savages across the board to everybody. So, if you want to get out of this frequency, then I feel like you really have to pursue the spiritual for your individual. And then, and what'll happen, there'll be these tangent benefits that really nobody mentions, that you'll find certain types of people and environments and circumstances and blessings that'll come into your life that you would have never been able to predict when your vibration is there. And a lot of this won't even touch you, the whole duality and ideologies and politics, and it won't touch you. It's a hard thing to explain, but when you vibrate differently, you're protected in a different way, and you are in many ways on a different frequency, even though you might still be here on this earth. I've experienced it, so I know.
It's about it. Yeah, it's what it really boils down to is that experience. Because if you don't have the experience, then you can't even articulate it, and then if you don't experience it, then you don't know it's real. And
right, which is why I was interested in the psychic powers, not for psychic power's sake, but because my logic was, if I experience this and I see it's real, to me, that was kind of a check mark that the scriptures are accurate and truthful. That was my purpose for wanting to get the psychic powers, and which I did. And I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing in life. Like, we're pursuing the spiritual pursuit,
I think it always comes back to the spiritual path, no matter what, because that's my personal experience. And that's like what I'm going through is like, I lost my job. So like as a dude, that's a huge like blow, and like trying to look at it as an opportunity, but I'm also like nervous because my main, like, my idea is to, like, craft stuff, but also like become some kind of internet personality or whatever. And it's like something I've always had in me. I've always had these seeds, but so I'm like trying to be open to the universe right now and look at it as me losing my job as a benefit. And it's just, I hyper-analyzed what my ego was in that situation, and what it was about that I just couldn't stand. And basically I was just telling a guy to do his damn job, from my most biggest ego's perspective, where like, the other guys would say that I was just uptight all the time and they didn't like working around me, but it was because they were all 100% basically in that political paradigm, and
Right.
they did drag me into it, and
You should have just told them all is love every time they asked you for your political opinion. That's
they
how you could
never
have
did,
gone.
though. They never did. That's the problem, is like I would argue, and it's like, yeah, I know George Floyd was, questionable character, but I also understand through being through the legal system that, like, if a white person and a black person both get tried for the same crime, or like, put up for the same crime, odds are the minority, the black person, is going to get more time. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a black person, so I can't really say that, but it did seem like that. And I don't know, I'm just getting sidetracked, but I think honestly I am like trying to raise my vibration, and I am like reorganizing, like recalibrating my path, and does have to be a more spiritual one. And it's just like, yeah, I was so money driven. It was like, damn, I only needed a few more weeks and then I could have bought a piece of land. And that money does really, it's a hard one to get out of your head. And
Right.
that's kind of where my last question is, and probably my final one I would want to ask you is, like, where do you like see the benefit of eliminating your ego? Like, what do you do to eliminate your ego? Do you see that as beneficial? And then kind of like what you do to cultivate, your spirituality into your daily life, and like, what's your vocation? Like, how do you find emotionally or spiritually gratifying work in this world? Because for me, I don't care how much I make. I just want enough to survive. And
Right.
I want to do that in a spiritual way. I want to be,
Right.
so I was curious if you got any kind of like, businesses or ideas that you want to share with the people about your
Well, so
ego
I'm
stuff.
like how I conduct myself. It's more in a sense that I think we have to first understand there's a difference between greed and abundance. And I think that line is oftentimes crossed. A lot of times we think we need more than we actually need because certain standards are set. And so I myself, like, to start off with, I'm very content with much less than I think most people would be comfortable with. And it's gotten me by really well in life because I'm good at managing my money. I never live out of my own means. I try not to have any bad habits, meaning like I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do any drugs or anything like that, recreational
That's good. I'm glad to hear, because like most people come into the pseudo spiritual realm through psychedelics, and they think that that's
right.
like
And like, I've never done anything. I've never done ayahuasca. I've never done any LSD. I've never done any. And if those people need that, listen, I think there's a time and a place for drugs. I do think it can help with big time trauma. I never did it. I don't really have a desire. I've had plenty of people who've offered me psilocybin and MDMA and ayahuasca and
so you
combo
never
and all
got
this.
into drinking or smoking weed, just the most common? Or
No, I have when I was really young in my teens. I have a couple of times, but it's just not my thing. I like being conscious. I like having a clear mind, whether that's through alcohol, whether it's through cigarettes. I've obviously drank when I was much younger, smoked cigarettes. And to me, it's just like, it's stupid. This doesn't contribute positively to your life. It's no different than arguing, with a Republican or a Democrat. It's like, what does it matter if you win? It doesn't enhance your life. Your bank account's not going to be, it's not going to be any bigger. You're not going to be any more peace of mind.
I even had a bet, Joe. I had a fucking bet, man. Money. No,
so just to answer that last question, because it's going to be 5:00 and I'm going to head out. I got another appointment. But
pardon me, Joe.
in terms of the spirit, listen, what's helped me, and I can only speak for myself, is that everybody, nobody really wants to work a 9 to 5 because that's drudgery, but we all need money. So there's this conundrum, right? Like, how do you generate an income but try to maintain some of your individual sovereignty?
Yes.
And it's like, if you really ask from the heart and do your spiritual work, like really put in that sacrifice, put in that work so that you kind of, elevate your vibration. When you have like a prayer, definitely be clear-minded, but more than clear-minded, have like a strong intention from the heart and project that into the universe when you're doing your prayers or your meditations or whatever it may be. But then it's like you let it go into the ether or the universe, whatever you want to call it, and be receptive to opportunities, peoples, and circumstances when they come across your path, because the opportunity won't necessarily come as apparent as you think it will. You know what I mean? Like, somebody might offer you a
dream job, or here's exactly what you wanted. No, it's not going to say, ta-da, here's your dream job.
My point is, like, when these opportunities come to fulfill, say, a need, in this case, financial, it's not going to necessarily present itself as like, hey, you're the perfect candidate for what I was looking for. It's not going to happen like that. You have to be vigilant, and this is what, this ties into trying to live your life spiritually and seeing the interconnectedness of everything. When you meet people in your life, I think so many times we all take for granted that situations and circumstances just happen, but they don't. There's a spiritual component to all of this. And every person you run across and you have some type of an interaction has a spiritual component to it. You can learn something and take something away from that experience, which is like, you can't be in that state all the time, because that would be exhausting if you were like looked at every single person and circumstance and like, what's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this? You can't be like that all the time.
Welcome to my world, man.
But there is a meaning to everything.
Yeah.
And if you keep that in mind with the vibration that you send out, say when you try to put a prayer out into the universe or the ether in context of like, financial opportunity, then try to remember that vibration, because that vibration will actually match the circumstance when it comes to pass somewhere, the next day, a week, a month, a year down the line. And I can also tell you the intensity of the prayer will determine how fastly it will manifest. That's Yoga Sutras 101. The intensity and the importance will determine how fast it manifests. So, that's I know that's not probably the most practical advice in the world, but like what worked for me, it is what has practically worked for me. Sometimes, like everybody, I freak out of what's going to happen with this. What am I going to do with this? And I've just seen that when you're vigilant, like, life really does work out for the better almost always, in the grand scheme of things. Like, you think, oh, this is an inconvenient situation, or I got screwed over here, or this is not good. But then when you play it out in the grander context and you see how, if you don't isolate a bad situation, so to speak, you always see that, oh, that's great that shitty thing happened because that put me here now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we don't think, we don't, we always isolate a bad situation and say, this is terrible. How could this happen to me? But if you back out of it and you try to view it in a grander context of things, you do really see that the universe is always on your side, because I've seen it in my own life, and so in that sense, try to have faith, but more than that, really try to just keep that energy out there and, ask God, the universe, your higher self, keep putting the energy out there, but mainly from the heart, and the intensity determines the rate at which it'll manifest. That's what I can personally attest to, and then you just have to be receptive. Don't think it's going to come as like, this is your chance. Like, you have to be vigilant as you're kind of moving about through the day. Meet people. If somebody wants to talk to you, take a hint at that. Maybe this person knows something or something, they can help me out with an opportunity. If all of a sudden you have an intuitive feeling to go down a road, you might meet somebody, like you have to think like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thanks, Joe. And you said, check out that Kundalini Upanishad, you said?
Yeah.
I've never heard.
Yoga by Swami Shivananda. You can download it online for free, a PDF. It's like one of the books that got me into it way back in 2000, I think 5 or 6. And I was hooked ever since, man. And yeah, today, Bastrika Pranayama is called Wim Hof technique. So whatever.
It's silly. Yeah. All All right, cool. Well, God
right.
bless you, man, and maybe I can
Ditto.
have you on some time in the future, hopefully.
For sure, man. Anytime we can set it up for another month or two out, and we'll talk then.
Sweet. All right, God bless you, brother.
All right, man. Ditto. Have a good one.